Hello, my name is Yoshifumi Hashimoto, the Executive Officer and CCO of Marvelous AQL. Today, I'm going to talk about how to make an RPG. My main focus is the role of a producer. In terms of the work involved, I take helm of various projects. But depending on the game, I'll take on the role of an all-around supporter, or write the scenario, and even come up with settings and names, and at times attend voiceover recordings and act as an audio director. When I get heavily involved, I'll get into the game design and decide what kind of game we're going to make. I simply love making things, so I try to get involved on various aspects of the projects that we're doing. The RPG titles I've worked on, as you can see here, are Rune Factory, Muramasa, the Demon Blade. Lesser-known niche games also include Avalon Code and Valhalla Knights. I also worked on an online-compatible RPG called Grand Knight's History, which was only released in Japan. I've also made simulation games like Harvest Moon, but today I'll focus on talking about making RPGs. So enough with the introductions, and this is the outline of our session today. It'll probably be difficult to convey the work involved by simply describing them, so I'll go into talking about things that actually happened and what we decided to do at those instances. I think that'll make things easier to understand, and you'll get much more useful information out of it. So we'll talk about actual concerns, problems, issues, and challenges that we face with these titles. Let's first talk about Rune Factory. The concept of this game is living the fantasy life. The main theme isn't necessarily about the often used premise of adventure. It's about living a relaxed life in a fantasy world and eventually passing away. I wanted to make a game rooted in such a premise. In JRPGs, you see a lot of settings where the main character is a hero and is someone special or of some status. But I wanted to make a game where you as the main character may not necessarily be a hero, but you still live a very rich life. For example, in the very beginning of Lord of the Rings, there's the Hobbit village. The game is similar to that, but you don't find the ring and instead live a very peaceful, long life. I also wanted to make a gameplay system that is different from RPGs that has come before it. We did our best to avoid having the villagers repeat the same message over and over. And instead of just being simple NPCs, they act like main characters and act under their own AI. Everyone in the village, even the old man and the woman, they have their stories to tell, and they have their own existence. They have their own opinions and concerns, just like any other person. Getting into a battle doesn't mean you'll come away with gold and treasures. The main character has to work very, very hard, raise crops, to earn a livelihood in order to exist. It's more like a game that features the realistic side of things that most tend to ignore in the fantasy worlds and settings. When you step outside the village, there are dungeons about. These dungeons have bosses, and once you leave for an adventure, the road is very, very long and pearls about. Then I thought about the concept of water stations during a real-life marathon, as if it was a similar long, long road. If you take breaks during your dungeon crawl, just like at the water station, I felt that people would be able to overcome them without giving up. But to capitalize on the game systems, we also put fields in the middle so that you can raise crops to revitalize yourself, give yourself more energy. And this happened to work out in the end. People who are good at the game do not need to rest and cultivate crops, while people who feel that the game is hard can do so that the game design adapts to the player's play style. Then in the summertime, the characters change into swimwear. When this happens, female characters sometimes put on a tattoo-like symbol on their bodies. This is actually a form of sunblock in this particular fantasy world. At the time, because of the way we built the characters, we couldn't make them tan, and we were looking for a way to get around this. We also figured that even in this fantasy world, there would be girls who would like to tan and those who wouldn't. From there, we embraced the idea that in this fantasy world, people didn't use sunblock as we do in real life, but instead put on tattoos to avoid the sun. It was a way to take something realistic and put a fantasy spin on it. Also, in terms of outfits, because it's about people who work in the fields, a lot of us would assume that they wouldn't care much about their appearance and what they're wearing. But we figure that because everyone is doing the same day in and day out, that they wanted to do something to stand out and maybe be noticed. When we went out to the real farms and asked young farmers, they actually felt the same way. So we decided to implement this idea. As such, when you put in little bits of realism from real life, it helps resonate with the players and makes it much easier to feel as though if it were real. Even if you have a great idea, a unique idea, if your users don't understand it, what is the point, right? They're certainly not going to think it's fun unless they really understand what you're trying to communicate. It's the same thing with movies. After you finish watching a movie and walk out of the theater, you sometimes feel as though you could do what you just saw. For instance, if you saw a superhero movie, you feel like you become powerful. And if you see a movie about magic, you almost feel as though you could actually cast magic, but you just didn't realize it until now. This, I think, is proof that bits of realism from real life is connecting with the audience. I want to make a game where we don't just lean on the fantastical and instead make it feel somehow real and relatable. With games, we have an advantage over movies in that players can also do what they want to do. They can choose their route, the way they want to live. For example, in Rune Factory, when you become friends with a girl, you can get married and even have a baby. In the latest version, you can even play as a girl, and when they become friends with a boy, they can get married and have a baby together. How far can we go in living your life in this game? If you want to simply live together with your partner, you can. And if you want to go defeat the demon together, you can also do that. We wanted to make a game where people felt like they didn't want the world to end, as if they didn't want to clear it because then that world would be over. Next, I'm going to talk about Muramasa, the Demon Blade. As you may know, this is a Japanese-themed swordplay action RPG. The motif is very Japanese. There are 108 swords in the game. This number of swords is significant as the number of 108 is known as the number of earthly desires human beings are born with in Japan. Also, the Oni characters that appear in the game were created to be different from ogres that originate in the West. I often see Oni translated as ogres, but I like to treat Oni as an Oni and design them as such. As for the characters that appear in Muramasa, there are some characters that Japanese people will recognize. In the Japanese version, the conversations were written in such a way that it would be slightly difficult to understand, even for a Japanese person. Let me just give you a quick example. The girl, Momohime, is the princess, and the boy, Kisuke, are the main characters. Momohime is a princess and speaks like royalty, and Kisuke is a ninja, so he speaks with a trilling Edoko-style dialect. In addition, in the case of Momohime, she'll take on other souls, which also cause her to switch up the way she speaks. So even if the situation presented in front of them is the same between these characters, depending on which role they play, we change up the way they talk and the way they grow. Also in the game, there are lots of edible things and items that appear along the way. It's said that all foods contain life energy called seiki, and foods that are special even have a soul. By eating the food, the main characters gain its strength from seiki, and uses that strength to increase the power of their blades. In terms of the setting, it takes place during the Genroku era, which encompasses the Edo period. It covers the latter years of the 17th century and into the 18th. At the time, fatty tuna, or as we know it here, toro, was not valued like it is now. The less fatty red meat was actually more valuable. And maguro sushi, the tuna sushi, was not very expensive at all. At the time, they also started farming sea bream and flounder. So while the prices were high, they could buy them. We wanted to show a food world that is different from what we know today. But of course, this world did not actually exist. This is still a Japanese-styled fantasy world. Just like in Rune Factory, however, by injecting some realistic elements into the world, it made it much easier to play and believe. Also, we made it so that you can change characters at any time, as well as change difficulties at will. We wanted players to be able to pick their own route and play the way they want. Having player choice is what makes games different from other mediums. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the emphasis on action, even though we're talking about RPGs. I often make RPGs and simulation games, but I feel that there needs to be an emphasis on action within these games. Because they're meant to be games that you play for a very long time, you almost have to have controls that feel even better than actual action games. For example, let's say if it takes a very, very long time to close a window to the point you get irritated. And then on top of that, whenever that window closes, it makes a weird system noise. You would think that as you play, you'll get used to it. But in reality, the stress actually begins to build until it gets to a point where players may actually stop playing, or they may just end up hating the game altogether, even though they actually like the game, the inside of the game. Not everyone who plays games is a hardcore fan. This may not apply to a lot of you here today, but it is true. And so, because of this, you really have to emphasize good action. But I think for me, perhaps this comes from my roots. I've worked on many action games and fighting games in the past. And to just give you an example, when you have a character jump, you don't just repeat the same up and down movements. You need to have acceleration to feel it. Or when you punch, you get the punch to feel good by having the punch come out very, very quickly, followed by a slower reset. I learned a lot of this through trial and error. I think this kind of tuning in relation to timing is something that I still value. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the volume and flow of information using a specific example that you see here. When making a game, the creator must control the amount of information along with the course of development or progress of the game. In my early days, when I was designing a stage in an arcade game, I thought of this gimmick. The ground splits halfway through, as you can see, and beneath it lays a pool of magma. If you proceed straight, the path is a dead end, and there's a switch. By explaining the elements in this fashion and not overthinking it, one may wonder, something's going to happen if I put on the switch, right? But when we actually did a focus group, the reaction confirmed that it was wishful thinking. I thought for sure the players would turn on the switch, but I was wrong. Instead, they plunged right into the magma. That's an instant game over, and many felt it was pretty unreasonable. So instead of instantly dying, we adjusted it so you would gradually lose health. But that actually didn't do much either. In fact, they would run into the magma even more and would die one after another. In this case, in addition to not being able to understand what to do, there was simply just too much going on. We were asking for more decisions to be made than one can handle. So there was a dead end, there was a switch, the enemies were approaching, and then you had magma. These conditions made it very difficult to figure out what your next move was going to be. By adjusting the condition of magma from instant death to loss of health, it's possible to say that the players briefly forgot about what to do with the switch and ran right into the magma instead. In the end, we didn't want to scratch the idea, so we added the word pull to the switch and assigned that command to the controller stick as if you were actually pulling. There may have been other ways to solve this, but when the players finally understood it, I learned two things: how challenging it is to communicate your intentions to the player, and the relief and joy when you succeed at doing just that. In RPGs, there are various missions and side quests. In a way, this is a result of needing to control the amount of information presented to the player. When players leave a game, they often forget where they left off, unlike a movie, as we just mentioned earlier. And when there's too much information, they can't figure out what to do. Maybe a week will go by, and you may start to forget about the story. Because of these situations, the developer must streamline how the information is not forgotten, but remembered, and create an invisible-like staircase for the player, basically to guide them. In doing so, there's no need to prepare every single step or hold their hands for them. The player should be able to figure out the more important things. So I just touched on side quests, but I'm going to take it one step further. For example, there's a remedy medicine in the location of the forest, so you head out. And then along the way, there's a village where you collect information and ultimately you return to the castle. If that quest is made exactly how I explained it, it'll become very repetitive and eventually boring. No fun. So what if we changed it to enter the neighboring village, and then someone leaves in need of the cure. When you finally arrive at that forest, the person has fallen, and if you return to the castle, you find out that the person was trying to get the cure for his girlfriend. The girlfriend is in the village. The flowchart, I know, might be a bit confusing, but in this scenario, we're able to link the village and the castle, as well as the relationship between the two people. This way, you feel less obligated to do the quests just for the sake of doing them. As such, it becomes less tiring and boring when you shape your idea in a circular form. Additionally, rather than realizing you've been fooled or tricked, this approach gives a deeper sense of gameplay. In RPGs, the cycle or circular movement applied to the story, as well as the system, helps to keep things at an exciting pace. And when that happens, we are sometimes pleasantly surprised by the unexpected moves and plays performed by the user. So, a little bit about making RPGs and where are they headed. When you really think about it, people don't really have to play games. There's really no inconvenience to us if they're not around. But personally, I think they're a necessity, and I hope you feel the same way since we're all here today. The thought, though, is that it's no fun if they come out as expected. In a way, by implementing ideas that are different or unexpected and unpredictable, it'll help make the game something beyond the player's expectations. It's difficult to know if you'll be able to deliver at that level, but, all you can do is trust yourself. So, it was the same with Rune Factory. Internally at the company, there were opinions about why we're making the game when we already have Harvest Moon, or why are we even adding combat to Harvest Moon. We don't think anyone is wanting something like that, people said. And we were even more surprised when we publicly announced the game. The fans didn't want a Harvest Moon where you wield a sword. It wasn't easy. And it was a very unusual situation to have very few allies who understood my plan. I was in a very awkward position. In the case of Muramasa, the development of the game itself went smoothly. But because of the Japanese motif, and I'm talking about very traditional elements, many thought this wasn't going to be an easy sell overseas, and also even in Japan. However, because we went all out with a Japanese fantasy theme and setting, rather than trying to accommodate a Western style or elements, players overseas said the game was fantastic. So, if you believe in it, you can create a path for it, and you'll have a sense of accomplishment. The most important thing is if you don't believe in it, it won't be communicated to the player. But if and when they do get it, it's the best feeling. Especially when the players get something that was rejected by others. They get it, and then those who rejected my idea, they didn't initially get it. that moment, that sense of feeling, it can get very, very addictive. And that's probably why I can't stop making games, even though it requires a lot of stamina and strength. To make an RPG isn't really that difficult, is what I think. But however, if you're serious about making one, you need to find some friends who'll come along the ride with you, as well as an idea and obviously some knowledge. It can be over the top or something realistic. That was the same situation for me for Rune Factory and Muramasa. I had a group of friends who believed in the idea that I presented to them. And if there's something you feel is missing, or slightly off, or inconvenient in RPGs that are available in the market today, you might be able to come up with something entirely different or new just by tweaking that one element. Even for myself, if it weren't for an idea I had one day to make an RPG, I probably wouldn't have made this many RPGs, and I wouldn't be standing here today in front of you. If there's one person after this session who is inspired to make an RPG, that's at least a new beginning for them, right? For me, I want to continue to provide excitement and entertainment. And I also want to be happy at the same time with what I've accomplished. I have a list of ideas I want to challenge and world of settings I want to create. Back in the days, there was a game, unrelated to Harvest Moon, where the overseas publisher requested us to change the second playable character to a male character. Originally, the game had one male and one female playable character. As part of the process of what we call culturalization, as much as we wanted to respond to their expectations, because it was a game where I wanted both the male and female characters to have a chance, I want both characters to enjoy the game. I want to bring a smile to everyone. As long as we're making games, I want people to be happy and enjoy the games. That becomes my motivation. And every time I see that and see the feedback, it keeps me long hours at work, and I want to continue to spend my time making games. What would be sad for me is if people stop playing games. As long as people love playing games and they want to explore and experience new games, I will continue to make games. In closing, I have a few stories to tell about Harvest Moon. As you all know, this is published by Natsume, the publisher out here in the West. I myself have and still continue to visit farms in various parts of Japan. What are they growing? what kind of vegetables are in season. I just like to check in and see what the land is like. But one day, I hope to do the same out here. Whenever I have a chance to talk to the farmers, I'm reminded of their dedication and hard work. But it would make sense to simply turn that into a game, just how challenging it is and how hard it is and the dedication these farmers have. So while including some of the hardships and lessons in the game, I make sure there's a great deal of satisfaction while playing. When I included a cultivation method in the game where you grow 2 different crops in the same year, there's an actual farmer who contacted me. He asked me if I really knew how that method worked. What does that mean? Well, he asked me if I was aware that the soil loses its nutrients during harvesting and that land actually starts to deteriorate. Well, of course, I did know about the fact that, but if I were to reimagine the entire process step by step, the true process in real life, it would have been a little too difficult. So what I did was I applied the part I thought was interesting and fun and fitting for the game. As with the RPG topic earlier, I left an element of realism in the game. It's been about 17 years since the first Harvest Moon game was released, and we still continue to receive letters and feedback from our users. A parent will write and say, "My child was plowing a field in the game, and it brought a smile to my face. I started laughing. I've never seen my son do that in real life." These letters instantly make me want to make a bunch of these games. And I feel very lucky as a creator, and that is why I make games. Another cute story I heard several years ago is when a child raised in the city saw an insect die. He told his mom that the battery died, not the insect. And when I heard that, I thought to myself, even if it's a game, maybe he can learn something about insects or other subjects that exist in real life. So he doesn't grow up thinking that insects can be recharged like a battery. We've also had users share their thoughts on how sad it is that animals get sick in the game. But instead of condemning the players that this happened because you didn't care for the animals, I would take a slightly different approach by communicating the obvious in a much more natural way. I realize our cultures are different in Japan and in the West in general and with specific subjects such as farming. But one day, I hope to make an RPG and a Harvest Moon game that goes with the different cultures. Thank you very much. Thank you. So we have about 10 minutes left, and we'd like to open it up for Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, there are 2 mics, one on the left, one on the right. And if you could just walk up to the mic and ask the question, we'll go ahead and ask Mr. Hashimoto and get the answer from him and translate that as well.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Hello. I was wondering, JRPGs sometimes have a bit of a reputation here in in America for occasionally talking a little bit too much, like going on a little bit more than isn't necessary. But then, conversely, some people accuse the American audience of being interested in nothing but shooting the next guy as quickly as possible. Do you have any opinions on how much like dialogue and story to gameplay is the correct ratio, or how do you think that should be approached?
はい。ですね、今いただいた質問ですが、まあちょっとすみません、語弊があればですけど、JRPG に関しては、シナリオも長いものが多い。まあそういった部分で、まあ海外に関してはこうアクションのものが多いと。で、ストーリーの部分と、そのアクションの部分に関して、の比率ですね。ストーリーでな。
So I just want to quickly recap the question, which is, yes, in JRPGs, there's a reputation of just too much chatter, too much dialogue. And then, but conversely in the West, you know, you go out and just shoot people. So where is that right balance do we think there is in terms of story versus non-story?
ですね、お話をするとですね、まあ実はですね、こう牧場だったり、ルーンファクトリーだったりお話を作ってシナリオも書いてるんですが、私も実は JRPG のシナリオは長いと思ってます。
So with Rune Factory and Harvest Moon, even though they may not all be JRPGs, I do agree. I tend to agree that there's maybe a little too much dialogue. So, yeah, so admitting that I do agree that the dialogue tends to be a little too long in JRPGs. I myself, I not only play J games, but I make sure that I know, what's going on in the West. And I do play shooters like Call of Duty. And yes, there's a considerable amount of difference and there's a huge gap. But I'm always conscious about the ratio, the right balance. And for example, with Muramasa, we really tried hard to make it into a compact, whether it's a sentence, a line, or a part of the story. We wanted to make sure that we communicated what we wanted to in a certain scene or level, but to try to keep it compact so that it was a well-balanced game.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello. I thought it was curious how you were talking about when you first started working on Rune Factory, how you didn't have a lot of allies in the company. And then when you brought it to Harvest Moon fans, they didn't seem to be too keen on the idea of adding combat to the Harvest Moon formula. So I'm wondering who it was who ended up purchasing Rune Factory. Was it Harvest Moon fans who were turned on to the idea of adding combat, or was it a new audience that weren't Harvest Moon fans that wanted that experience?
今の質問ですが、当初見方のなかったそのルーンファクトリーに関して、発売したところハーベストムーンの遺伝子 DNA ですね、があるということなので、そのユーザーさんが買ってくれたか、もしくは新しいユーザーさんが買ってくれたかという質問でよろしいでしょうか。
So yeah, I'm just going to quickly recap. So you are curious to what type of users did we gain a new audience, new user base for Rune Factory, or did a significant portion of Harvest Moon fans end up purchasing and trying Rune Factory? That is the question, correct?
はい。それでいくとですね、一番初め発売前に、実はその情報に飛びついてくれたのは、今までハーベストムーンをやったことがない人でした。で、発売したところ、新しいユーザーとハーベストムーンのユーザーがですね、半々ぐらいですかね、両方のユーザーが買ってくれて、で、今シリーズ重ねてますが、シリーズ重ねたところ、ハーベストムーンのユーザーも、発売後に関しては、あれそう思ってたけど、意外とこの食べ合わせって美味しいよね、みたいな形で喜んでもらいました。
So when we first announced the title, from announcement to maybe pre-release, leading up to the release, I would say that we had new users, so non-Harvest Moon interested consumers and users were keeping up with the information that we were releasing from time to time. And then once a game hit the shelves, the Harvest Moon fans, they started to obviously read about the reviews in the game. And I think they had this sort of inkling about, okay, if this has enough elements that resonate with me since I'm a Harvest Moon fan, then I should probably give it a try. And so now that, we have both series and we could talk about kind of the merged audience in a way, I do feel that the earlier Harvest Moon fans, they feel that it's a nice balance. It's quite a nice balance of blending the elements from Harvest Moon with the new elements serving for the Rune Factory type game. So I would say that maybe it's about half and half right now.
Hello. A common thread I've noticed in many of your games is the relationship building factor. Like you will find an NPC, you will fall in love with them, and eventually that will have significance on the gameplay and story. I'm wondering what it is about this element you enjoy and how you think it adds to the games and engages the players.
はい。今の質問ですが、そうですね、私のありがとうございますというところですが、作っているそのゲームの共通項、キャラとの関係性であり、そこで好きになったりすることで、ゲームにどう影響を及ぼすか、どうしていきたいかというところの質問だと理解してますけど、よろしいでしょうか。
Okay, so thank you for this question. I'm flattered, and so I want to say thank you for asking me this question. But yeah, it is a core element, a core theme. So I'd like to go ahead and answer.
Please do.
はい。そうですね。基本的には昔アクションゲームを作っていたので、おそらくそのキャラとキャラとか関係、例えばその格闘ゲームだったりアクションゲームだったり何々が好きだったっていう設定しか作れないですね。 なので、基本その欲求でお話を作って、その関係性をもっと深くしたいっていうゲームをどんどんと作りたくなったというところが一つはあると思います。
So one thing that probably has is important to me as to why I'm emphasizing this sort of relationship building is that prior to working on these games, I had a lot of experience building action games and maybe fighting games. And in those types of games, there's not a whole lot of this relationship building, and it's really more about the setting and where you're at and, you know, who your opponent is. So I think the root of my desire and my intent sort of comes from there. So it's a different type of approach that I'm taking.
はい。で、どういった、ことをしたいか、影響を及ぼすことでどうしたいかというところに関してはですね、もともと自分で作ってたそのキャラクターとかを、まあなんて言うんでしょうね、ファンレターっていう形で、まあ日本では独特なのかもしれませんが、そのキャラクターに関して、まあここに住んでるよということで、お手紙を昔いろいろいただきました。で、そのあるキャラクターがこう喋ってる言語があって、そのキャラクターと友達になりたいんで、その言語の大学に進みますとかですね。そういった形の話を聞くと、まあこう、まあなのでやはりこう人生に影響を及ぼしたいのかなというところですかね。
And so that was kind of, you know, how it all got started. But back in the days, and even until now, and maybe this is more of a Japanese thing, I'm not sure. But originally, when we started receiving a lot of fan letters, you know, they would look at us or the company or the people behind this game and think, oh, you know, these characters actually live in this world. And if I send a fan letter, that maybe I can have a conversation with them, or I can, you know, have a relationship with them. And shortly after, this may or may not come as a surprise to you, but there were people who were asking, you know, how do I get to speak the language, speak the lingo that we are seeing in games, in your games? And is there a school that I can attend, or is there any way that I can learn how to speak the language, because I want to build this relationship with the characters that you guys created? So that really got me thinking, and that, you know what, some of these people really think that there's a character that they can relate to, and they want to build this very nice relationship with. And I think that just continued to roll on and has naturally become a very core component of our storytelling.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think we can take one last question, if that's okay.
Thanks for the presentation. You mentioned that in Rune Factory you had introduced the farming so that less skilled or maybe less hardcore players would be able to keep up and enjoy the game, whereas skilled players could go ahead into the dungeons and progress more quickly. Do you feel that this was a successful solution, and are you planning to do something similar in future titles?
それでは最後の質問なんですが、ルーンファクトリーで、入れさせていただいたその給水ポイントですね、といったものが効果的であったかということと、そういったアプローチを今後も続けていくというか、やられますかという質問という理解で。
Yes. So just to recap, it was in one of the slides earlier, but during a very long dungeon path or a crawl that for the less skilled players that, like in real life in a marathon, that you would have these break points and that they can sort of regain their energy back and then make sure that they don't, give up and feel that it's boring or they need to go back and redo something, that would be a motivating factor to keep them going. And the skilled players can, basically go straight out if they wanted to. And if that was effective or not, and that if I would be taking a similar approach for other games in the future.
それではですね、答えたいと思いますけど、マラソンにリレーするその給水ポイントみたいなものっていうのは、非常に効果的だったと思います。というのは、やはりその、システムっていうのは、何でもそうだと思うんですけど、こっちが、作り手側が押し付けるものではなくて、ユーザーさんがその遊び方をやっぱりいろいろ、なんでしょうね、アレンジして楽しめるっていうことが必要だっていうことでいくと、やらなくてもいいし、やってもいいし、やらない人にサービスあるし、やらない人はですね、俺はそんなものを使わずにいけるぜっていう、なんでしょうね、優越感っていうんですかね、そういったものも得られるということで、システムとしては非常に良かったと思っています。
So, as a result, yes, I think it was very, very effective. And, as a creator, as a developer, we're creating content, delivering that to the users. And what we want to avoid is to say, hey, this is how you're supposed to do it. Basically force upon how you're supposed to get through this specific part of the game by doing X, Y, Z. I want to make sure that there is some level, some extent of player choice. So if you're a less skilled player and you feel like, oh, wow, this is an option that I can take, and you're still getting rewarded, in a small way every step you make, then that will make that player happy. If you're very confident, you can get through it in one try, and there's a reward that's appropriate, scaled to that type of experience, then I think that player will continue to maybe take that approach in the next level, in the next dungeon. So I just want to make sure that there is an option and that will be something that will entice the players of varied levels to be able to play our game. So yes, I do think that it's an approach that I will keep in mind for future games as well. So thank you very much. Thank you for attending today.